Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. The question is, how often should you move your frog and what settings should you have for different uses? Let's dive in. I'm going to make this a bit of a short video and just say, honestly, I don't move my frogs. Why would I need to? I've got all these planes over here and they're all set to whatever I'm going to use them for. Why do I need to move them? Now some of you are going to say, yes, of course, you've got all of these planes. Of course you can have them dedicated and set up to specific tasks. But honestly, if I just had 2 planes, I still wouldn't move the frog. Almost all of my planes have openings that are around 1/16 of an inch, a very wide, relatively open mouth. The exception to that are my smoothing planes. And really, there are only 2 that I tighten up to have a really, really tight mouth. That's, Once I've set up the plane and I start using it, I don't adjust it ever again. And I leave them all relatively wide open except for the smoothing plane. The only time you need that mouth really, really tight is if you're doing difficult grain and you're trying to remove tear out. And the only time you're doing that is with the smoothing process. If you're trying to do that at other stages of the milling process, you're wasting your time. The other planes are designed to remove stock. The smoothing plane removes tear out and leaves beautiful surfaces. And so that's the only time you need to tighten up the mouth. A lot of people love to complain about these old planes because they don't have the adjuster screw back here in the frogs, so it's harder to adjust the frog on these old planes. When Stanley added this frog adjustment screw, everything became easier for adjusting the frog. And then with the Bedrock introducing these pins that lock things down, it became even easier. Now you can adjust it really smoothly. And because of those additions, a lot of people now think that people back in the days must have been adjusting their frog regularly and changing its settings. And the answer is no. Once you set it up and you got it working, everything was the way it should be. Now, every now and then it might get bumped out of place, or you have a different iron in there, and things might need to move around. But once it's set up, there's no reason to move the frog again. With one odd caveat. What would happen if you didn't have 4, 3, or 2, and all you had is 1 plane? Well, in that case, yeah, I could see time to time where I might want to move it back and forth easily. And for someone who just wants to use 1 plane, there may be a benefit to that. But to be honest, if someone's using a plane to the level where they care about where the mouth opening is on the plane, then they have more than 1 plane. Because once you get 1, well, then this one does that job a little better. And then, oh, but I need that one. And and then they use this phrase, I'm not a collector, I use all of my planes. But that being said, the next question that I get quite regularly is, okay, I'm setting up my plane for the first time, where should I set the frog? Well, that's a really good question. So here are 3 different planes I have set up. Down here on the bottom is one of my jointers, and the mouth on this is a little bit more than 1/16 inch. It's a really, really big mouth on it. This one here in the middle, that's one of my number 5s. This is actually pretty small for mine. It's about 1/32 of an inch. It's really relatively tight, and very few of my planes actually are this tight on a plane I use a lot of stock removal. This one has an opening that's about 1/4,000 of an inch, or 0.1 millimeters. This plane only takes incredibly thin, wispy shavings. If this is 1/4,000 of an inch open, if I take a shaving that is 3/1000 of an inch, it's probably going to jam it up. Most of the time, I'm going to take him around 2/1000 of an inch or less, and most of the time around 1/1000 of an inch, where I'm just getting that tiny little bit off the edge. I want to get rid of the tear out. That's what a smoothing plane is for, and that's the only reason you need that tight of a mouth. For every other operation, a big mouth isn't a problem, as long as it's, no more than 1/8 inch. But when you are going to set it up for a particular use, it is fairly fiddly, especially when they don't come with the adjuster screw in them. For this old style, where it doesn't have it, we have to end up taking it apart. You get these 2 screws and you just tweak them, just a tiny bit of a turn. And with those 2 screws slightly loosened, this is still solid. It's not moving around much. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and put the iron back in, and I want to lock it all down. And I want everything to be tight, and I want this to feel relatively tight, but I know I just took a little bit of pressure off it. What I'm going to do is take a wooden dowel, and I'm going to put that in on the back of the frog. I'm just going to give it a light tap. And I'm going to watch that mouth close up. And once it's where I want it to be, I'll very carefully lift it up, flip it over, take this all apart, and then take those 2 screws and lock them down. If the frog is moving around a lot and you don't really need this, then the screws are a little bit too loose. It doesn't take much, it just takes a little bit of movement back and forth, and it allows you to see exactly where the mouth is rather than guessing back and forth and back and forth. And even then, once you do tighten them back down, that tightening might turn it a little bit and open up the mouth a hair, and then you'll have to go back to it. And there is a little bit of fiddling to one of these. If it has one of these adjuster screws, it's a little bit easier. We can take it apart, and then we're going to loosen these same 2 screws up, but this time I'm going to loosen them up just a little bit more because we need a little bit more movement. Instead of going like a 1/16 of a turn, now I'm going to go probably almost a 1/4 of a turn. And now with this screw, we can move the frog in and out. The problem is getting to that screw, and this screwdriver gets in the way. I need one of the longer shanks that the handle can be back here past the tote. And I'm going to stick it in there, and now I can rotate that handle back and forth and adjust where it needs to be. So what I'm going to do is put this back in here, lock everything down. This gives me a really good idea. Now in this case, you can hear it. There's just a little bit of slop to that frog, so I got to be a little more careful with it, otherwise I'm going to be bumping around a bit more. So I'm going to start by turning it down, and I'm going to watch that mouth and see how that mouth closes up. When I get close to it, I might go a little bit past, because when I tighten those screws down, it's going to lower that iron and open up the mouth a bit more. Then I can take it apart, tighten those 2 screws back up, and then put it all back together and see if it's where it should be. And most of the time, it's not. And what I have to do is then go back through the whole thing over again and fiddle it back and forth until I get it just right. For these bedrock style, they're really easy. I'm going to use that screwdriver with a long shank, and I'm just going to loosen this one just about a 1/8 of a turn or so, loosen this screw just about an 1/8 of a turn or so. Now I've loosened up the frog. Now I can get into this, and I can run this back and forth and change my setting just by giving it a little tweak one way or the other. And I can watch my mouth and see exactly where it ends up. Then once my mouth is where I want it to be, just come back here to these 2 screws, give them that crank down, and that crank down, and the frog is locked in. So these are really, really easy to adjust. So don't be deceived if someone says, ooh, this plane is easier to adjust than this plane, that means that this plane is better. Well, no, you do that adjustment once when you set up the plane to begin with, and then chances are you're never going to touch that frog again unless you bump it, drop it, or you didn't crank it down tight enough to begin with. But if you do want to be that odd person who has that one plane that does everything, and they want to adjust it back and forth, then who are we kidding? You're the guy with the low angle jack that has 3 different irons. And you don't mess with frogs. Frog settings usually just come down to the mouth and how big open do you want it. Do you want to have a tight mouth? Then adjust it tight. If you want to have a big open mouth, then adjust it big open. And then have that plane set there. Smoothing planes, small mouths are good. Every other plane, a larger mouth is perfectly fine. So don't worry about it too much. Just set it up the first time and forget about it. I hope this answered a few questions because I've been getting a whole bunch of them, but if it didn't, throw them down in the comments down below. I do read through them and I'll answer any questions I get on there. And it really does help out the channel. Anytime you comment down below or just CBD or some snide remark, thank you. You're helping out the channel. Even if you put something you think is hurting me, no, it's actually helping me. Thank you, it means a lot. You know, algorithm and all. But if you really want to help us out a lot, then think about joining these people over here. Those are some of the patrons on Patreon. And between patrons and members, you guys sponsor this channel and I get to talk about what I want to talk about rather than what some company wants to sponsor me to talk about. And I get to say what I want to say, not what someone else wants me to say so that you buy their product. And I hope you like that. If you have any thoughts or ideas on that, tell me, comment down below, all those things. You know how this works. I think they'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. If you're really one of those people who has one plane that does it all and you move the settings, then we know you don't care about frogs. You care about toads, warts and all. Hit the road, Jack! It's kind of crazy. A previous owner of this plane thought it was a low angle jack.